Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to introduce the next ethical theory called virtue ethics. In its oldest form, virtue ethics is attributed to the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle was from Macedonia and he moved to Athens at the age of 17 to study with the philosopher Plato at his academy. Later in his own life, Aristotle started his own school called the Lyceum. It was during his time there that he gave the lectures that got compiled into the book called the Nicomachean Ethics. So Aristotle gave these lectures at his own academy, the Lyceum, and reportedly his students and he would both walk back and forth. So they would sort of pace. He would be talking, and as they were listening, they would both be pacing. It's kind of interesting to think about having a classroom in which everyone is moving in that way. But in any case, he gave the lectures that then his son Nicomachus compiled and put together as this book, named after his son, called the Nicomachean Ethics. So that's where we get his account of virtue ethics. Aristotle begins the book by talking about the relationship between activities and their aims, or the good they produce, or the telos that they are pointed towards. So Aristotle's theory, insofar as it's teleological, that it's related to the end of activity, is considered a consequentialist theory, like utilitarianism. So he begins his discussion by saying that every activity has an aim, and the aim is that for which the activity is done. So if you think about an activity such as shipbuilding, the end of that activity, the good that is produced, is a ship. If you think about the activity of exercise, the end of that activity, its telos, or the good that is produced, is health. So every activity aims at some good. So I've given you an example where the good is something tangible, like a ship, and also an example where the good is something intangible, such as health. But all activities aim at some good, some end, some telos. He goes on to argue, though, that there is one end, there's one good, there's one aim that is ultimate. It's that for which we do all the other activities. And that end is happiness. So I exercise in order to be healthy, but I want to be healthy so that I can go on lots of hikes with my dog. And I want to go on lots of hikes with my dog because it makes me happy. So all other activities, all other ends are subservient to this ultimate end called happiness. Check that out in your own experience. Do you agree with Aristotle that there's an ultimate end of all our activities called happiness, and that we do everything else for the sake of that? And we wouldn't flip it around the other way. So for example, I might say, well, I really want a new car. Why? Because I think it'll make me happy. I wouldn't say, I really want happiness so that I can get a new car. The relationship doesn't make sense the other way around, and the reasoning is that happiness is an ultimate end, that it isn't subservient to any other ends. So a quick word about this term happiness. The term that Aristotle is using in Greek is eudaimonia. And it's important to point this out because our term happiness can often mean something like a fleeting emotional state that comes and goes. What Aristotle is describing with eudaimonia is perhaps better translated as flourishing. So living a flourishing existence, what does it mean to flourish as a human being? And really, what does it mean to flourish as a human being? So in the book, he talks about what flourishing means for other kinds of beings. So for example, you could think about for a plant, flourishing means to grow. That's kind of about it. There isn't a whole lot going on for flourishing, right? It takes in nutrients, it grows. That wouldn't be the same definition as for a human being. Likewise, you could say, well, okay, a plant flourishes by taking in nutrients and growing. An animal is different than a plant. It takes in nutrients and it grows, but it also has the ability to sense things around itself. So its flourishing is also going to include its ability to sense and to move about. And then we would say human beings also take in nutrients and grow. We also have sense abilities. We can sense things in our environment. We can move around in our environment. But in addition to that, human beings have a capacity to reason. And so to flourish as a human being is to reason well, just as to flourish as a plant is to grow well. So what does it mean to reason well? And in the next video, I'll talk about reasoning to the mean, reasoning to the mean between extremes called virtue. So being able to find virtue is actually a way of reasoning well for human beings. So the ultimate aim is eudaimonia, living a flourishing existence. Often the term gets translated as living the good life. But again, it's the good life for a human being, which is going to be different than the good life for an animal being and for a plant being. Since this is the aim, your next question ought to be, well, what's the activity that leads to that aim? So we said the activity of shipbuilding leads to a ship, the activity of exercise leads to health. Well, if the end is eudaimonia, what's the activity that leads to that? And in the broadest sense, the activity is, or the science or the art that leads to this, is politics. That might sound sort of strange to you at first, right? Perhaps because of the way that we think about politics and politicians in particular, maybe it doesn't seem like what they're aimed at is eudaimonia, flourishing, or the good life. So what Aristotle is talking about is how do we organize the community? How do we organize the community such that it leads to flourishing for the community? So when you're thinking about that, okay, what does that mean in a concrete sense? It means things like, what kinds of laws should be enacted? What are the laws that would be enacted that would lead people towards living a flourishing existence as human beings? In a way, that's going to mean, what are laws that will lead people towards virtue? When we're thinking about our education system, what should we teach in our schools? At what age should we teach certain subjects? Well, what's the curriculum? You could also think about the realm of art and festival. So what types of festivals do we have? What types of art do we fund? How do we spend our money? What kind of behavior do we encourage? So politics is this art or science that is geared towards achieving flourishing for the community. And what that will mean in part is passing laws, having policies, having art that's funded that leads the people towards living a virtuous existence. So in the next video, I'll talk about what virtue is.